All right, demoing watercolor, my favorite thing. There are essentially two base techniques that you want to know for watercolor. The very first one that we're going to do is called wet on dry. What that means is that we are going to use a wet brush and wet paint on dry paper. So I need to spritz my palette. I should have done that earlier. And when I do my mixing, this is going to get a little complicated. I'm going to keep this down here and then just try to paint up here. And we might get it super messy. We'll see. I will take my larger brush, in this case, get it nice and wet, saturated, squish it around in my water, and I will brush it against one of my blobs of paint in these wells until I have a bit of pigment on it. And then I'm going to come over to wherever I'm going to mix this. I'm going to put mine over here and brush it off. And then I'm going to dip my brush in the water and continue adding some water. I'm almost like scooping and just moving fast so that that drip doesn't fall off. And then I'm going to just work at that pigment until it evenly mixes into my water. I do want it to be like a true puddle that I could, if I lean this down, I could, pour it off of my plate. And I want it to be a nice like medium saturation here. I don't want it to be so saturated I can't see through it. I want to be able to still see that transparency, but I don't want it so desaturated that it is extremely transparent for this exercise. When you paint with watercolor, you tend to paint from light to dark, so it's better to start with it desaturated. And by desaturated, I don't mean closer to gray as in color theory. I mean less physical pigment in this water. It's better to start with it desaturated and go with more layers, because you can always add, you cannot subtract. So I am going to just take my brush, make sure it's nice and wet, and then I'm just going to create a nice little area on the paper for a swatch. Notice that I am moving it around back and forth like this, and then I will come in at the end and neaten up any edges if I want to have a nice even looking edge. What I'm not going to do is come paint this edge and then fill it in, especially because, man, sorry guys, I have to turn this down just a little bit more, especially because students tend to not paint with enough water, and so this will be almost dry by the time they come back to fill things in, and mine is actually pretty okay because it was still wet, but if it is dry, I'll try to replicate it. And I'll let this sit for a while and say maybe I'm going through and outlining everywhere that I want blue. And then I come in a bit after this is dried. My fan is for me, but right now I'm going to put it on my watercolor to try to dry it out. When I come back in here, I'm going to move this off to the side now that you've seen me mix, and go back over it. I am actually now adding a second layer on top of where that line was, and you will see the shadow of an outline. It looks worse up here than it does on camera, but you can still see it, especially over here and some here. So you want to work filling your space kind of evenly. If you have a really large space to fill, filling from one edge and trying to make sure that when you grab more, you're keeping the edge wet and just working and making sure that you have enough of your color mixed up ahead of time that you can just continue to work from your wet edges. So it doesn't matter if over here dries if I'm just continuing to paint this way, but I want to keep this edge wet, even if that means grabbing a little bit more water and adding it in there. Because as long as the edge is wet, I can keep moving that pigment around. Watercolor paper has a little bit of a resist on top that stops it from soaking in and dispersing out this way through like capillary action, like it would if I grabbed some printer paper and I put a drop on and it would just like soak it up like a paper towel. It has that resist, so your water's only going to go, or your pigment is only going to go where there's already water. It's not going to continue out onto this dry area unless you push it there with your brush. So go ahead and take some time to do a couple swatches in wet on dry, and then we'll do our next technique.